Welcome to the Private Practice Startup, where we inspire you from startup to mastery. We chat with entrepreneurs, experts in the mental health and business arenas, and successful private practitioners to give you the tools needed to make your dream practice a reality. Visit theprivatepracticestartup.com for awesome resources, free trainings, and so much more. Here are your hosts, Dr. Kate Campbell and Katie Lemieux.
Hey there, Startup Nation. Welcome back to another episode of the Private Practice Startup Podcast. We are your hosts, Katie Lemieux and Dr. Kate Campbell.
Hey, everybody. Nice to be back for another episode.
So thanks for joining us for our 100th episode as we surpass that 2-year mark and really celebrating the 100th episode. And if you missed that, you definitely want to go back to that. So last week's show, we had Christy Westerfeld, who talked to us about coaching and building an online coaching business and what you need to do to protect yourself. She's an attorney out in California. Totally down to earth, super fab, super casual. So if you are thinking about doing coaching services or more online services, you definitely need to protect your legal rights. So that is really important.
Yeah, that was a fun episode. She had so much value, and she was doing it during nap time. So she's a hashtag mompreneur.
Yeah.
Yep, nap time empire. So I've got mad respect for her. Pretty cool.
So if you are new with us, you are our VIP, you're our very important person and guest. And if this is your first time listening, we have a special gift for you. We have our A to Z cheat sheet, the essentials for building and growing your dream practice. Head over to privatepracticestartup.com. Head over to the resources tab, and there you will find an A to Z cheat sheet. And it's really more than a cheat sheet. My goodness, I'm getting tongue-tied with that. It is actually 5 days of practice building information, resources, and tips that come with that. So you'll definitely want to check that out. And of course, if you're a loyal listener and you're part of Startup Nation family already, we thank you for hanging out with us again. So today's show, we have Buck Joffrey, who's actually a surgeon, but he has taken a different direction in his life and helps other high-paying professionals learn how to build wealth. He has a podcast as well called the Wealth Formula Podcast, and we're going to be talking about wealth, money, and all that great stuff today. So we're super excited to have him. And the title of his podcast is Wealth Formula, and we're going to be diving into all of that. But before we get started, we want to just have a word and thank our sponsor.
Today's sponsor is the Private Practice Startup Attorney Approved Private Practice Paperwork. So as clinicians in private practice, you guys know we have to have paperwork, right? And if you want to continue to do what you love and avoid legal risk, avoid legal issues, then you need to have paperwork that meets the legal and ethical standards so that it's up to par. And We've actually spent over 100 plus hours. We've worked with multiple attorneys, bringing our paperwork to the highest standard so that it meets all of those necessary requirements. And we have done all of the hard work, paid the high attorney fees so that you don't have to. So make sure you check that out and grab a copy of our free HIPAA form, and you'll have the opportunity to get our release of information for just $5. So head over to our shop tab, and you'll see our paperwork where you'll be able to find that, and we'll also have the link in our show notes. So it's easy breezy. You can find it there.
And it's $58 worth for $5.
Yeah, can't beat that, right?
Still the deal. All right.
So let's get started. What's up, Buck?
How are you?
Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Thanks for being here.
So I'm really excited about this podcast because I know that your podcasting folks had reached out to us. And one of the things that was very interesting to me is that you're a surgeon by trade. And at one point in your story, and you'll share your story, you decided to kind of go on the wealth journey, or maybe you've been on the wealth journey for a while. And I know, our audience is comprised of folks who are just starting up in private practice. And then we have people who've kind of mastered their private practice and they're looking to scale, whether it's online or through wealth building. And I know, and Kate and I have actually been doing a lot of more money mindset conversations. And this is just one of the areas that I'm passionate about. So when I'm not doing private practice, when I'm not doing the private practice startup, I'm talking about investments and real estate and things like that. So I'm really excited about this. So we just thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, this podcast tickles your fancy, right? It's right up your alley.
It does. We've had a few podcasts on taxes and things like that. And usually during the podcast, I start to see Kate kind of list away. We always joke around. I'm the CFO of our company, and she's the...
Got it.
Yeah, because I hate tech.
I'm totally down with the wealth conversation. Taxes, that's a snooze fest for me, but yeah.
Yeah.
So share a little bit with us about your journey. How did you get to be where you are today?
Circuitous route. I started out, just as a good student. I think that decided in college at one point that I wanted to go to medical school. So, got good enough grades to do that, and then went to medical school, and then decided I wanted to, I got really into the academic side of things. So I actually, was publishing lots of papers, was writing book chapters, etc. Wanted to be a neurosurgeon because that seemed like the top of the food chain, and it stroked my ego. And so that's where I started. And I started a neurosurgery residency at the University of Michigan, and after a couple years realized that I didn't like the lifestyle as much, and which actually was an important revelation. I think that a lot of people don't kind of let themselves have, and switched over to other surgical training that ultimately led me towards plastics, and so I finished at those kinds of surgical things in 2008, and was still pretty academic throughout this. And then in 2008, had a aha moment, like a lot of people do, and they pick up a Robert Kiyosaki book. Mine happened, I finished my training, and we had graduation, and the next day my wife and I got married, and then we went on our honeymoon to Puerto Vallarta. And I had never heard of Robert Kiyosaki or any really thought about reading any financial book, but I accidentally stumbled upon it in an airport in Puerto Vallarta, and there was only like 3 books in that bookstore, and 2 of them were with guys with long hair and no shirts on. Those are very interesting.
You were destined to read it.
So which book did you read first?
I read Cash Flow Quadrant, which was actually the right book for me to read.
I thought you were asking about the romance novels as opposed to.
Right, yeah.
So which one did you pick?
Yeah,
that's funny.
That's right. So that kind of was for me was a very a lot of people talk about people who are Kiyosaki people. People who've read the book and who've been inspired always have their purple book moment, and for me it was like a lightning bolt, and the reason being that throughout this entire academic journey of being a good student and successful and everything, it had never occurred to me that I could be an entrepreneur. Never. That was not even part of my reality. It was like a different world that I never even thought, well, gosh, this is something I could do. And that was the framework shift for me that really just changed everything. And so I ended up starting my own practice, but I, kind of held to those principles and started as a business with the intention of phasing myself out, which I did after a few years, and then started another business, and then phased myself out and started another business. And then I started making a fair amount of money, and then, the principles of investing very much, I wasn't going to go do what everybody else did, which was hand their money to a wealth manager, because at this point I had, Robert's wisdom, and also realized that my dad was a real estate guy, and I never wanted to do what he did, but I also didn't, I lived with a fair amount of privilege growing up. So it obviously worked, and I was not afraid of that world. So.
It's interesting as you share your story, and I'm sure a lot of our audience can relate, especially those kind of like new in a private practice, especially in the world of therapy, is we've been laden with these like messages of you can't make money in therapy, you should work at, if you're a registered intern, right, that's our process before we become licensed, well, you should work in community mental health and things like that. And, when I was in school, those for sure were the messages. And nowadays, registered interns are going more and more into private practice straight from grad school. So the idea and the ability to become an entrepreneur is the thought process, like you're saying, it wasn't even part of your reality. Yeah. And I just think it's so cool. I mean, just culturally and where we've come, and especially with the internet and things like that, there's so much more possibility. But I like that you said like you didn't even have this awareness.
Yeah. I mean, I think, actually talked about, the nice thing about having my own podcast and building my own tribe was that I got to meet Robert Kiyosaki and
Cool.
had him on the show and spent a lot of time with him and some meetings and stuff. And I told him this story about what happened, and I said and it just made me think that the funny thing is that the more successful you are in academics, the more successful you are in the traditional paradigm of education. Because you're constantly getting this Pavlovian feedback and these dopamine hits of success, right? You're constantly, looking for that pat on the back, and you keep getting it. The deeper you go down that hole, the more difficult it is to actually see that there's a world outside of it, which is entrepreneurship. And so the irony is, and I see this all the time now with friends who've been extremely successful, and even those who went to business school, they're ultimately just looking for a job, right? They're just looking for a job because they just want someone else to tell them what to do, because they're really good at doing what people tell them to do and to follow the curriculum, so to speak. And so it's ironic, but it's true. It's the more successful you are, the more difficult it is to become an entrepreneur.
Interesting. I thought it would be maybe like inverse, because I see, like, especially for professions that have to go to school for a long time, is there is that discipline, right? Like meeting deadlines, the discipline of studying, reading, writing, and things like that. And, I always look for where do you have those skills already, and how can we apply that to entrepreneurship? And especially for therapists, like one of the things that we talk about all the time is therapists have amazing marketing and sales skills. They're just not aware of them because they think they exist in the four walls, in a couch with a client.
Yep, in the clinical space.
In the clinical space, you know what I mean?
Right.
And so we talk about all that, and we like to kind of pull what's working already. But that's an interesting thing. So share with us about your wealth formula.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the wealth formula, there's a couple components to it. And one is, first, there's the math, right? The math is actually pretty simple. I think it's ultimately wealth is a product of it's a product of actually investing, putting money towards making more money, and then velocity of money, which is basically how quickly you get your money back from your investment and then redeploy it, and then the use of smart leverage. Those things are, they're pretty straightforward. And I don't need to probably get into them too much, but I think if you look at just about anyone who's gotten wealthy from investing, I mean, those are the components of wealth right there. But beyond that, I think there's other things to consider that are important. And one is, what is the paradigm of investing that creates true wealth, creates a lot of wealth? And if you look at, again, going back to the way we're trained in conventional financial wisdom, we're not really trained in conventional financial wisdom. In fact, what happens is we go through school and we have a curriculum we follow. And again, this goes back to the good student. And then we finish school, and then we're looking for people to tell us exactly what to do in things that there's no longer a curriculum for. And one of them is how to invest your money. So if there's no curriculum, you end up defaulting to conventional wisdom. And conventional wisdom in finance is basically dictated by Wall Street. And Wall Street says to invest your money in stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. The problem is that conventional wisdom, as you know, is often wrong. The world is not flat. Indeed, there's this is one thing that I remember, back at being a kid, I remember, and you guys probably remember this too, on the wall of every classroom, there was a food pyramid.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the food pyramid said that you were supposed to eat like mostly starches, and there was, you just kind of work it up, and at the very end there was fat, But what we know now is very different from what that food pyramid looks like. In fact, I remember in 5th grade, my teacher saying, what do you think the perfect food would be? And No one raised their head. And he said, pizza, of course. Right? You have, bread, and then you had your tomato sauce, and then you had your cheese for your dairy and a little bit of meat. It's perfect.
Some people are feeling totally validated right now. They're like, yes,
exactly. And if you look at the food pyramid, that's a perfect food. Sure. The problem is that food pyramid was created in part by, it was based on a Harvard study, at Harvard Medical School in the 50s, that unfortunately was funded by the sugar industry, and there was a strong bias there because the sugar industry did not want to show any correlation between cardiac disease and sugar. And so came the food pyramid, which neglected to talk about the importance of simple sugars, inflammatory things that result in cardiac disease. The point I try to make, the point of this long, drawn-out story is that, first of all, conventional wisdom is often wrong, and conventional wisdom can often actually be dangerous. It can be dangerous to your health. Conventional wisdom can be dangerous to your financial health. So, and that conventional wisdom can also be dictated by special interests. Now, of course, if you look at it from the standpoint of financial conventional wisdom, stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, Wall Street is a special interest, and Wall Street gets wealthy on the backs of everyone who's investing that way. And so now I'm not asking people to completely change the way they invest. I just want people to look at it for what it is, which is, listen, what do we talk about when you, and I know you're interested in real estate, for example, what do the financial advisors and such call real estate? They call it an alternative asset. Alternative. Now, so you guys are psychologists, right? So what words come into your head? What do you think about when you hear the word alternative? Well, you start to think maybe blue hair, or maybe a nose ring, or something like that. Something that is just not something that everybody should do, or everybody socially acceptable, whatever. And that's on purpose. It's on purpose. It's not, these words are not there by accident. Alternative assets, the things that they talk about with real estate or precious metals, these are the things that have been there for thousands of years, well before the New York Stock Exchange, but yet they are alternative. And mainstream is paper and derivatives. So that's kind of that's my shtick.
So as our audience, like I was saying, is some folks are coming into private practice, and maybe they've had a retirement fund or a 403B with their nonprofit or something like that, and now they come into private practice and they're worried. They're worried because, well, I got to get clients, and then that, like, maybe retirement's like an afterthought, or investing and stuff like that. And like you said, like, you're not asking one to like change what they're doing right now, but what are some things that going from, and like you're saying, from that disciplined mindset of do this to an entrepreneur in private practice, and not having, I don't want it to be like the afterthought, like how do I invest for myself currently and in the future, but like what can you give people in that position of starting a business, not having the funds, but what should they be thinking about? What should their projections be? What's important for them to know?
Well, I mean, I think that, listen, I think it's one of the problems in this situation when you're first starting out is that, that equation that I use, the math, requires money to invest. And so it's hard. One of the things whenever people read the Kiyosaki books, they think, you have this moment and then you just see the excitement. They're like, I'm going to retire in 5 years. I'm just going to buy a bunch of real estate. But unfortunately, it requires a little bit of money. So I think the challenge is trying to figure out where that money comes from. And I think, and that it is simplistic as it sounds. I think that that's something to focus on. I mean, I think there are ways, in anybody's these days, as you know, and I think you mentioned something about this earlier about online type, businesses, et cetera. I mean, you have a lot of skills that you have that are highly marketable. in more ways than just therapy. And, like online, whether it's coaching, whether it's, online forums, et cetera, I would focus on entrepreneurship first to create more money and then figure out the investing part. Now, with the caveat that a lot of what I find, and I was guilty of this to a certain extent myself, is that a lot of entrepreneurs initially, when they start making money, they get super excited and they'll keep dumping it back into their business sometimes, and which is great. And I did the same thing, but the only problem is with a business, what happens is the more you feed it, the more it'll eat. And
it's like a teenage boy.
That's right. I mean, I used to be one of those. And so you have to be very careful to set aside that money. And, that whole saying about paying yourself first, it's very, very true. I can't tell you how many people I know who have very successful businesses, but they're just so, they're knee deep in those businesses, and all they need is to have a couple of bad months and they're in big trouble. So I think the idea of, setting aside some things to say, you know what, I need to create more than one leg on this stool to keep me afloat long term, and to keep that perspective.
We're big fans of Profit First, so it would be good to add a link for that podcast episode in the show notes. We'll do that for you guys here. And that's something that we've been using in the private practice startup, and are encouraging private practitioners to use that so that you can profit first in your business and pay yourself first, and have more money to be able to invest.
Yeah, and that's really important. And I know for me, about like a year and a half ago, I went and did a Millionaire Mind Intensive, and, they talked about the jar system or the envelope system. And, part of that's your financial freedom account, right? And so money, it's supposed to be 10% of my money, but I'd siphon as much as I can in there, because that's the investment money. And that money is only used for passive income vehicles. And that's the stuff that begins to create wealth while you're still working. And I love, Buck, that you say, and, I'm wondering if some people are listening to this podcast, and it's I actually just started Spanish lessons yesterday. And it's one of those things where your brain just stops working. And I'm hoping as the information's seeping in, you're hearing it, but you're I'm not really sure what I'm doing or whatever, but this is good, right? And what's really important about this is you might remember this conversation, and Kate and I do talk about, and we talk about this in our e-course in regards to the money mindset, and really make, a lot of times people come into private practice and they think okay, well, I want to make this much money, so I need to see these clients. But you want to make that much money, but how many vacations and holidays do you want to take? What do you want your schedule to be like? What do you want to put away for retirement investment? What if you get sick? What about an emergency fund? So then you realize well, maybe I'm not charging enough, right? And I like how you're talking about that, is you don't want to just think about what you want to make and, oh, you really wanted that leather couch now in your office. It's, are you feeding yourself first while you're also doing that? And always keeping in mind paying yourself first. Kate talks about profit first, and we switched to that actually over a year ago now. Mm-hmm. Jokingly, but I am the CFO of our company, and Kate loves when it's bonus time. We do quarterly bonuses, and each time and it actually increases, which is great. And she's like, "Hey, bonus time!" I'm like that too, but I already know what's going on and what's coming, so it's not as exciting.
Right.
But it's all essential, and really, I remember the days, talking about, being a kid where my dad would take us to the bank every Saturday to deposit our money. And now it's I have one bank with 9 different accounts, another bank with, 5 different accounts. And, but really being able to put your money in different places so that it will work for you. Yeah.
It's just really important just to not forget about that part. And I mean, I have to just, you look at people who are making what I think most people would consider a lot of money. I have doctors and stuff in my investor groups and stuff who are making, maybe $250,000, $300,000, $350,000 a year. And they've been doing that for 15, 20 years. And it's remarkable how little they have in terms of their net worth. It just is just unbelievable. And a lot of that is of course, that we have a natural tendency to, as people who, during school you have no money whatsoever, to as soon as you start seeing money, you increase your own overhead to match the increased revenue, right? So that you keep your profit margin about the same, even though you're making a lot more money, your personal profit margin, because you buy your fancy car and you buy your fancy this or whatever.
I work hard, I deserve this mentality, right?
Kate's smiling. I think she's relating to her own story as you talk about this, right?
Yeah, and that's but it's also because, again, when you go back to what you're quote unquote supposed to do, you're supposed to be contributing to whatever IRA or 401k or whatever you are, and if you're just doing that and you're doing nothing else, that's what these guys, women and men and women, have been doing, and it's not working. It's not working, because if you look at your typical, let's just look at your typical 401k or IRA, that they're invested in usually a portfolio of some kind of mutual funds, right? And mutual funds sound like they're adult, they're grown up type things that you ought to be doing, but if you look at the last 3 decades, they've been growing at an average of about 3.5%. And you take that and then you tack on the fact that you get about 2% inflation per year, it's growing at about 1%. Mm-hmm. And 1% means that you double your money every 72 years. That's not enough.
Every 72 years.
Yep,
72 years. And so that's the problem, right? Is like what we're starting to see is like, what I'm seeing is that a lot of these people who've been really working hard and think they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, it's like a big sticker shock. They're like, oh my gosh, I'm 50 years old and I've been working I've been out of residency training or whatever for 20 years and I have like no money to retire. If I decided I want to slow down, I just have no money. I would last maybe 2 years. So
right, and it's a scary thing, and it almost feels like unfair, like you're saying, like you've worked so hard. And so, as you guys listen to this podcast, wherever you're at, and if you are already investing in some way, awesome. And if you're not, we really want you to think about this. My spouse and I, we often talk about like, I wish I knew what I knew now, 10, 15 years ago. I would have loved the opportunity to start investing earlier, but I didn't know the information, right? And so maybe this podcast is an introduction to kind of getting your mind going, and maybe check out the book Cash Flow Quadrant, or even Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki too. That's a great intro book. I've actually also read his Tax Wealth book, and I have the ABCs of Real Estate on the way. I'm waiting for that to come in any day. Yeah. I'm super excited about that. But, this stuff is really important. And, you guys do work hard. You guys work hard to make a difference in people's lives. And we want to make sure that you're making a difference in your own life. Mm-hmm. And that's really important. Most of us come into private practice because we want that dream lifestyle. And part of that dream lifestyle is continuing the education of, how do I create this, not only with my private practice, but in other ways as well. So I know this is a fun podcast for me because I love talking about wealth creation and things like that.
Sort of falling asleep there at the
side. I'm good. I'm hanging with you guys.
So, Buck, what do you want people to take away from your message today?
Well, I think if nothing else, hopefully it's opened up people's eyes, and I would recommend reading. I think the Cash Flow Quadrant was really written for, and I can tell you that Robert Kiyosaki, and I spoke to him about this. The Rich Dad, Poor Dad was the book for the masses. Cash Flow Quadrant was the book for professionals. These were very intentionally written in the order that they were. They're written with increased sophistication. And so I would recommend that. I would recommend, if, I have a very simplistic book too, that you can just download from wealthformula.com called 7 Secrets of Eternal Wealth. And, or you could also just text 44222 and type in Wealth Formula, one word, and you can get that. It's a good place to start. Listen, I think what I think people should get out of it, is that no one, like, it's not a guarantee anymore, right? We don't live in a world of pensions. We don't live in the world of guaranteed income after we're finished working. And so this is really something that you need to start thinking about when you're younger, if possible. Otherwise, you end up being one of the doctors I'm talking about. And you have to think about not only today, but what you're doing to create some security for yourself when you're older. And, I'm not talking about when you're, 80 years old. I'm talking about even 10 years from now. Maybe you just want to slow down. Now is the time to start thinking about those things. Don't ignore them, because no one else is out there. No one else has your back. That's a misconception.
Very true. Well, we thank you for being with us today and sharing your knowledge and wealth. And that's so cool that you got to have Robert on your podcast. I'm sure that was such a pleasure and a joy. I'm a big fan of his as well. So thanks so much, Buck, for joining us today. And Buck had mentioned about his book, and we're actually going to put that on the show notes page so you guys don't have to worry about writing down the numbers or whatever you guys are doing. We'll put that right on the show notes page. So that's the best-selling book, The 7 Secrets of Eternal Wealth. We'll add that link to the show notes page. So next week, we're super excited actually about this podcast. We are inviting Melody Wilding back.
For round two.
Yeah. And you'd heard her on a previous podcast talking about PR, how to make your private practice PR ready.
Good
so we'll
memory. Yes, with the actual
you.
title. We're going to be talking about imposter syndrome, though. So that's going to be a cool episode as well.
So join us for that next one. And of course, always hang out with us in Facebook look for the Private Practice Startup and ask to be part of our community of over thousands of therapists across the globe. So hang out with us there. We'll see you there. And thanks for allowing us to inspire you from Startup to Mastery, Startup Nation.
See you next time.
Thanks for joining us on The Private Practice Startup. Visit theprivatepracticestartup.com for awesome resources, free trainings, attorney-approved private practice paperwork, and so much more.